talking about finishing beef cattle. We're going to our agenda's pretty quick. I'm going to introduce Royce Towns in just a moment. He will cover the information, and then at the end, open up for questions. For those, and I think everybody on the call this morning knows Royce Towns. Royce has been in the co-op system for 31 years. He's worked at local member co-ops. He's worked at Wilson Farmers. He's been at TFC in the Feed and Animal Health Department for several years. Royce lives in Macon County. Does a little farming on the side. Enjoys what he does, and always does things the right way. So, with that, Royce, I'm going to turn it over to you. We appreciate the time and effort you put in getting this timely topic together, and the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you with us this morning. Joe, I thank you for serving as moderator and as our technical assistant, and I'll ask you again, are you recording this?
I am, and I'm kind of proud of
that. All right, excellent. So we are going to talk about finishing beef cattle. We are going to cover just some basics. The topic of finishing beef cattle is one that could be a college course that would last for an entire semester, and obviously we're not going to get into it that deep, but we do want to provide you with some basics that you can use to help your customers with the questions they have and help them accomplish what they're wanting to do. As Joe mentioned, we've had an unbelievable amount of calls and inquiries over the last couple of months about people that are wanting to know more about finishing beef, or maybe they've never even tried it, but they're going to take a stab at it. And those are the guys that you get that you'll be able to help. So I think we'll start off with Joe. I can't advance. There we go. So we'll start off with just a definition of what finishing actually is, in case you don't know. When we talk about finishing, the definition obviously is to bring something to an end or a conclusion, or to complete a process. So in this case, we're talking about bringing a calf to the end of their life. It's going to be about the last 300 to 350 pounds, or the last 90 to 120 days. Joe asked for the last time. I'll ask this time. Please mute your phone. And let me back up. When I start throwing out these numbers, I'm using average numbers here, and throughout this program, I'll be talking about just some general averages. Understand, when we talk about finishing an animal, we could be talking about something from a dumpy Angus or a Hereford calf up to a something like a Holstein steer. So these numbers are just averages. They would be definitely specific to the individual situation. Here in Tennessee, we typically are a cow-calf state. We wean calves. They'll go to a background or a soccer that might be here in the state. It might be in Oklahoma, Kansas, somewhere where they'll graze them for a while, and then they'll go to a feedlot. Feedlot is typically where calves are finished. We just don't do a lot of that in Tennessee. So when we talk about finishing a calf, we're going to go from a baby calf that weighs less than 100 pounds all the way up to a 11 to 1,300 pound carcass. 1,100 pound finished weight. That carcass will be somewhere around 50 to 60% of the live weight. So you're looking at a 700 to 800 pound carcass. Lots of growth has to occur over that period of time for us to get to where we want to be. Here's a slide showing what happens from conception all the way up to maturity. We're not wanting to, if you can see my arrow there, we're not wanting to finish an animal down here and have a 500-600 pound finished animal. We aren't wanting to finish one way up here as they reach maturity, because that wouldn't be desirable either. What we wanted to do is take advantage of this exponential growth curve that's occurring here in their life and have them slaughtered before they get out here and flatten out towards maturity. This is just another representation of what is happening during our finishing phase. What we're looking to do is hit a sweet spot. We're looking to, as we're finishing an animal, they're going to be accumulating, this is very simplified obviously, they're going to be accumulating fat at a faster rate than they are accumulating muscle and bone. And so we want to hit a particular sweet spot there and slaughter them when they have the right proportion of muscle, bone, and fat. And I will say that finished, when we use that term, we're not talking about an individual weight. We're not talking about a number of days. It's actually a physiological state or a condition when that animal has reached its prime, as good as it's going to do, and that's where we want to harvest that animal. If you look at the USDA grades, obviously the one on the left is the prime animal. That's what we're trying to achieve. We want to feed them in a finishing program. We want to feed them excess energy over and above their maintenance requirements that they're going to store as both marbling that you see inside the muscle tissue there and back fat that you see on the outside. We don't want an excess of back fat, but somewhere around 4/10 of an inch is typically normal. Anything else is going to be considered waste. So here's another generalization. When we think about feeding during the finishing period, the only excess energy that they're able to store is anything that's over and above their maintenance requirement. So what is their maintenance requirement? Well, that's just staying alive. Their basic metabolism, being able to be alive, wake up, open their eyes, and get up and start moving around. An animal that has to walk to get food and water, that's part of their maintenance requirement. If they're dealing with heat or cold stress, that too is part of their maintenance requirement. And then parasites, both internal and external, that would add to a maintenance requirement. This is just a basic concept through all of beef production. You have to overcome maintenance every day before you can accomplish the things that we're trying to do. So anything we can do to raise that top, the top bar up here, if we could get that up higher by feeding a higher energy diet and getting more calories in it, that will help us. Also, if we can minimize this maintenance requirement, keep it as low as possible, that will help us as well. So when we talk about finishing animals, we're here to fork in the road. You have to decide whether you want to go down the path of what's becoming somewhat popular now, grass finishing beef, or if we want to go with picking out grain, and you really need to pick one, or feeding grain, and you need to pick one. Grass finished beef is exactly as the name implies. That's beef that is fed on grass with the intention of doing the same thing you would on grain. You're overfeeding them above their maintenance requirements so that you're accumulating this fat. Seems to be something that the consumer desires. We can have our own opinions about it, but I think there is room in the marketplace for both types of beef. But when someone talks about planning on finishing an animal, they need to decide which one, because there's really not an in-between. They can either be on grass, they can be on grain. If you want to see a disaster or something with some very negative results, you've got somebody that's got 3 or 4 calves and they're dumping out a 5-gallon bucket of feed every afternoon. The calves come in and eat, and they go back out on pasture. That's not a finishing diet. It needs to be either one or the other. Some of you guys will remember Jim Sherman. His comment was, you either need to feed them or not. So if we're going to have them on grass, have them on grass. If we're going to put them on a grain program, bring them in, shut the gate, and pour it to them. So some differences that you want to understand here between grass-fed beef and grain-fed beef. On a grass-fed animal, you're typically going to see more yellow fat. That's both the external fat and what marbling is there is going to be of a yellow color. That's because of the carotenoids that they're picking up out of the grasses and the green forage that they're consuming. The flesh is typically going to be darker than a grain-fed animal, and it's going to have more of a stronger flavor. Compare that to the one at the bottom, the grain-fed beef. You have more of a pure white fat. You're going to have more pink or reddish lean tissue there, and it's going to have more of a mellow flavor that people like. Neither one of those is right or wrong. As far as I'm concerned, it's up to the customer to decide and figure out which one they want to achieve. Some things to understand still about the grass-fed beef. Turning them out on a fescue hillside is probably not going to work. There's just no way you can get enough energy intake to reach that degree of marbling and fat accretion that we'd like to see. Someone that's going to grass feed beef is going to have abundant high quality forage. It's going to have to be intensely managed. You're going to have someone that understands forage species selection, because during a given finishing period, you're probably going to need more than one type of species of forage. They all need to be at their premium at different times through the year. You'll have to deal with things like fertility, weed control. All of those come into play. Rotational intensive grazing also a part of that. So in general, a grass-finished beef program is going to take longer and going to be less efficient than a grain program. Now, you can, as soon as this is over, you can get on the internet, you can see people claiming that they have grass-fed beef that will grow faster and do better than anything on grain. On an apples-to-apples comparison, that just is not true. And the example I would use, if you took 2 identical twin steers that have the same genetics, and we put one on a grass program and one on a grain program, they're going to look just like those steaks that I showed you in that previous slide. The grain-fed just cannot match, the grass-fed cannot match the grain-fed, because you just have a higher maintenance requirement and you have a less dense energy diet. They're going to have to walk to harvest every bite and to go get water. That's going to cause them to increase their maintenance requirement. They will have to deal with parasite control, fly control. Both of those would increase their maintenance requirement. We want to make sure that's controlled. And then to make sure they're getting the most out of the forage they are consuming, if it's applicable to their situation, we'd like to include an ionophore. I see that is misspelled. I apologize. So for somebody that's on a grass-fed program, what we would talk about from the feed side is to provide a free choice vitamin and mineral supplement that is designed for grazing animals. And that would be something like 96516 Supreme Cattle Mineral with Rumensin. Of course, there's lots of other options that will fit there as well, but that's one I would suggest to start with. So if we want to go the grain-fed route, we're talking about changing this animal's entire nature. We're going from an animal that's been on grass all its life and converting it over to 100% grain diet. That's not something we can do overnight. That's a huge transition. Has a lot to do with the way the rumen functions. This rumen on a grass-fed animal, they are designed, this is what they're designed to do, obviously. They run at an optimum pH there to digest forage. They have a group of microbes or a population in there that is designed to digest forage. The microbes that digest forage are totally different than the ones that are designed to digest carbohydrates or starches, and they'll operate at a much lower pH when we convert them over to grain. And that's why I said when we come to that fork in the road, we need to decide which one we're going to do, grass or grain. It's hard to do both to make that work. So there's a picture of a healthy rumen. Cattle that have been on grain for any period of time, you're not going to see that. They will start to erode these rumen papillae. You will possibly see lesions there as they have been on grain longer. I'll talk about that here in a few minutes. As I mentioned, the majority of the cattle that are finished in the United States are finished in these large-scale feedlots. In these large-scale feedlots, they can do things like feeding with a TMR truck. That's not something that's going to be applicable to a small-scale situation in Tennessee. So what we want to talk about are some options that do fit those types of producers. When we talk about a grain-finished diet, we're talking about something going to be high energy, high starch, and low fiber. The first one I'm going to suggest to you would be a complete pellet. Some of you have been around a while, you've heard us talk about the advantages of a pelleted diet. It's a complete diet. There's no sorting, there's no selection. They can't pick through it and decide what they want. You have very little segregation of ingredients. You have an increase in feed efficiency when we feed pellets as compared to a loose feed, because there is less waste at the feeder, and because that pelleted ingredients has gone through a pellet diet, it's slightly more digestible, so they're actually getting more out of it. We go to the next slide here, item 487. That is our 11% pelleted beef finisher. That would be the one I would suggest for a pelleted diet. It is high starch, high energy. It's roughly 50% corn. There is no forage required, and that comes out of some CRF research that we have done using just a complete pelleted diet. You do have to transition these animals onto full feed. I'll talk more about that in the Tenderloin program. You never want to let them run out. This product works really good for someone that doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the confidence to feed a corn diet, or maybe they've got limited labor. It is easy, but we also have to be cautious there too, that because it's easy, they don't need to neglect these animals. They do need to check them on a daily basis. Whether they're using a self-feeder or bunk or whatever, that needs to be checked on a daily basis. Need to manage that feed trough, clean out the fines, keep the feed fresh, manage the mud around the feeder. We've been talking about the rain. That would definitely be a problem right now. Another option for a pelleted feed is for someone that wants to participate in an all-natural program. Item 94325 fits that bill. Meets the requirements for most all-natural programs that I'm aware of. There's no animal fat, there's no animal proteins, no urea, and no medications. So there's an option for those guys. So the second one I'm going to mention is going to be kind of odd because I'm talking about ground corn and concentrate. There are people that for whatever reason, usually it's people that raise their own grain and they've got a grinder, they're going to grind something. They don't want to use a pellet. They don't want to use a corn and tenderloin program. They want to use something they can make there on their farm. So I'm not recommending this program, but I'm telling you that it is available. It's out there. It's something we can do if they want to, if they're adamant. Item 446 is probably the concentrate that I would recommend for that situation, with the understanding there's going to be great potential for problems. Anytime you grind corn and feed a full feed ration to a group of cattle, you have greatly increased the surface area that's available to fermentation there in the rumen. So things like bloat, acidosis, all those, we've really increased the chances of that happening. So that's why I'm not recommending it. If they are adamant to doing, then they need to really build a complete feed. You'd be in a situation there where you'd be adding some hay or some soy hulls or something at the farm in the grinder to make that a little bit safer. And so what I'll say there is, if your customer is adamant that this is what they want to do, I'd ask you to work with your feed specialist to develop some type of formula or formulation there that be specific for their given situation. And then finally, the third option, and probably my favorite for finishing animals, both from the efficiency standpoint and from the end result. It's the most efficient way of doing it and gives you the best quality beef, is the corn and tenderloin program. The corn and tenderloin program was something that was developed many years ago, originally designed for finishing Holstein steers. And CRF has a huge amount of data where we have been involved in that in the past. A lot of that's 30 years ago, so it's been a while. The whole shell corn, the purpose of that is you are limiting the microbes' access to the starches that are in there. So that makes it safer. You also got the physical size of the corn that adds some room and scratch factor. So it just makes everything work a lot better. Excuse me. In this tenderloin pellet then, we've got a similar particle size, so it doesn't segregate when the two are mixed together. The pellet provides your protein and your amino acids that balance up well with the corn proteins and amino acids. You've got your vitamin and trace mineral premix that's in there as well to cover those needs. And you've also got some rumen buffers there. So it's kind of a good package when you put those two together. The standard program, the standard product for tenderloin is item 441. That is an A-list product that you can buy by the single bag out of the feed mills. It's medicated for rumensin, and somebody that's been around a while will remember that prior to VFD coming down, this was a rumensin Thailand product. We decided that the majority of the producers did not want to deal with a VFD for feeding out a few calves, so this is the A-list product, but we do have the option of Thailand, MGA, or both of them. All can be used in combination with rumensin. The reason for the Thailand, if you don't know, is for liver abscesses. Anytime an animal's been on a high-grain, high-starch diet, they can develop lesions in the rumen, and that's fairly common. There are bacteria, fusobacterium, that will migrate through those lesions into the bloodstream and find their way to the liver. They kind of set up house there and start to form some liver abscesses. So anywhere there's liver abscess, we don't have liver function, and that's something that you have to have in a feedlot situation for them to convert feed. The problem with it is it's usually subacute. It's not something that you can see. It's not something you can walk through a group and identify. So that's why Thailand has been popular for that in the feedlots in the past, and we do offer that as an option. The other additive would be MGA that I would mention. That's melangestrol acetate. It's a synthetic progesterone that prevents heifers from cycling. Go back again to that maintenance requirement. If a heifer is out here and she's cycling, she's riding other animals and they're moving around, interacting rather than eating, we have significantly raised their maintenance requirement and lowered their feed intake. So that's not a good thing when it comes to finishing animals. So both Thailand and MGA are options on a custom order basis. So we get a lot of questions about what is the tenderloin program. If you look on the tag, about all it says is feed 1.5 pounds per head per day along with unlimited shell corn. Well, that is the program, but there's a little bit more to it than that. It does require adaptation. You can't bring an animal in off of grass and put them on a corn and tenderloin program just right off the bat. So to begin with, what you want is a weaned animal that is already up on full feed of a complete pellet. That's something like 94-176, 94-339, something that has some fiber in it. That's something that's fairly safe. And I should have mentioned, I want to give a tip of the hat to Rick Seiler because I'm kind of stealing this from him. He did a good job of explaining this here recently. and I took some notes from that. This is a conservative program, this adaptation. I've known people that have dealt with corn and tenderloin programs for years and have experience with it. They will do it much quicker than this. But if you're going to give a program to somebody that's maybe new to it and doesn't know what to do, this is probably the conservative way of making sure they're as happy as they can be. So get that animal on full feed up to on a complete pellet, and then at week 1 of the transition, you want to start blending. We're going to use 75% of that original pellet and 25% whole shell corn. Week 2, then you go to 50% pellet, 50% corn. So we're increasing the corn, bringing them up on starch. And then week 3, we'll go down to 25% of the pellet, a pound of tenderloin, and the remainder corn, all the cleanup. And then for the duration of the feeding period, you're going to put them on free choice shell corn and a pound and a half of tenderloin every day. The rate of tenderloin doesn't change. And as they increase and start consuming more feed, it's kind of a self-balancing diet. You're actually going down in protein as they're consuming more and more corn. I will mention here when we talk about free choice shell corn, some people have a problem understanding what that means. That means that they've had all they want to eat. Well, how do you determine that? That means that if I'm feeding once a day or preferably twice a day, when I go out to feed those animals, you should see a little bit of shell corn still left in that trough. That means that they had all they wanted without grossly overfeeding them. If you come to the trough and you find that that trough is empty, you don't know if they finished eating 30 minutes ago or if they finished eating 12 hours ago. So that's what we're talking about when we say free choice or ad lib feeding of shell corn. So on this tenderloin program, once they get started, don't let them run out of feed. You do want to see 5 to 10% orts, and that's just a fancy term for leftover. What about forage? I get that question quite often. I don't recommend it on the front end. If somebody's had some problems with some calves going off feed or apparently not doing well, then we can add some forage to the diet, and usually just offering a round bale of some type of grass hay. All we're looking to do is give them an option of selecting some long stem fiber to help with the rumen. Keep in mind that's going to reduce their gains and reduce their efficiency, because every bite of forage they consume is going to be corn and tenderloin that they don't eat. So it's not a good trade there as far as the gains, but it can be done and might be an option if they're having some issues. Still, you have to manage those animals. You have to look at them. You want to observe them for lack of appetite. If you go to feed and there's an animal that stays in the back of the pen and doesn't look good, that's an indicator something's going on. You look for bloat, animals with tender feet, and scours. And scours brings up a good issue because of the manure. Most people aren't accustomed, especially if they haven't done this before, seeing the manure from a calf that's on corn and tenderloin. What we're looking for there is loose manure, but not watery. If it jets out of there like water out of a pipe, then you've got a problem. But it's not going to look like manure that stacks up when cattle are consuming dry hay in the wintertime. Visible corn is normal. That's not anything to get alarmed about, because the microbes have had access to that starch in the rumen as it's passed through the digestive tract, but you will still see visible pieces of corn in the manure. So in general, just on finishing diets, you either feed them or you don't. Choose grass or choose grain and go all out. You want to slowly adapt them to full feed over a 2 to 3 week period. You always want to maintain a constant feed supply, and keep in mind that there are some additives that can really help us. Rumensin, Tylan, MGA, all can help improve feed efficiency during a feeding program. So there's our goal. We'd like to have some high quality, tender, tasty beef. There's more than one way to get there. Sometimes people ask about the cost. Just again, in round figures, if we were feeding 120 days of a corn and tenderloin program, that's going to hit somewhere around $350, and that's using corn prices today and tenderloin prices. If you went on a complete pellet, you're probably going to jump that up to somewhere around $500, $550. But you're buying a lot of safety and a lot of convenience there with that program. If they want to delve any deeper into that, and you want to help them, there are some budgets that are available online from North Carolina State. You can download spreadsheets, and they can include everything as far as yardage and labor costs and all those kinds of things if you're looking at somebody that really wants to fine-tune this and play with the financials on it. I think John has a summary sheet of this presentation that he plans to send out after we conclude. And Joe, I guess at this time, I'll open it up for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Royce. And John will send that copy. It'll be a one-page summary. It will not be the presentation that Royce gave, but it'll be an opportunity where you can actually you can make a copy. It'll be over the different feeds that Royce presented. It will. This is just a copy of what John will be sending you. So that'll be forthcoming to everyone. If there's additional question, you can visit with your feed and animal health specialist, and they can get this to you. I'm going to unmute the phones in just a moment. That was something we'll give everybody a chance if you have questions for Royce. Two things.